I've been looking for a set of coasters and really couldn't find anything in the shops I liked, so I thought I'd make my own. I'm going to share with you how I made these watercolour coasters, and you can do it even if you think you can't paint. I found wooden blanks that do come with these little feet online, and I've worked out a way of using stencils and reverse stenciling to get these really lovely effects. They're ever so quick to do, and a little set of 4 also makes rather a nice gift. My name's Liz Chaderton. I'm a watercolour artist based in Berkshire. Every week I share tips and tricks I wish I'd known about ages ago. This week it's more of a craft, but as we make these coasters, we'll learn about creating interesting textures with salt or plastic wrap. We'll learn how to use our stencils in a different way to lift out rather than to paint through. To make these coasters, what you need is a coaster blank, or if you've got woodworking skills, of course, just cut this yourself. I bought these online and I got 30 for about £15–16, and they come with little dots, little foamy dots that you can put on the back to give them feet. They're not things of great beauty, so I like a bit of sandpaper and just sand off any rough edges like that before you start. We're going to be working in watercolour and practicing some of our watercolour techniques. So I have got some watercolour ground. This is Daniel Smith's, just in white, and they do black and sort of a buff and a pearlescent and all sorts. Schminker does a transparent and a white, and Quor or golden do one as well. And it is basically like an absorbent gesso. It's designed to stick to anything, as you can see. It's like absorbent gesso, and it makes your surface, any surface, a little bit more like watercolour paper. Not identical, but a little bit more. It lets you do wet and wet and all the different beautiful techniques that we love. I use this on canvas all the time, but you can even use it on glass. Well, you can use it on anything. So we need something to prepare that surface. And here's one I prepared earlier. So I only did the top surface, and that's had 2 coats on, which I think is going to be enough. I will make my mind up about how I finish the back at the end. Then, of course, we need some leftover watercolour paints. And then to do our pattern, I'm going to use little stencils. And I bought 12 of these sort of wildflower type stencils online for £5 or £6. I'll put a link in the description. And to lift off the colour, an old toothbrush is really handy, or a stiff bristled brush. And oh, I've got a spider. You don't need a spider for this, but we'll set him free in a second. So once you've sanded them down, as you saw me do, it's then a case of, in fact, I haven't done this very well at all, have I? Putting your watercoloured ground on, 2 or 3 coats, sanding in between to get it smooth, and then letting it dry for 24 hours. If you try and use it too soon, it can lift off the surface. Once your coasters are fully dry, the first thing we have to do is to prepare the background. And it's a great opportunity to use up leftover paint. And I thought I'd do these all sort of blues and yellows and greens. So we can start with just a really wet and bright background wash. Now look how this watercolour is going on. I've prepared it with that watercolour ground, but you can see the grain of the wood is showing through still, and though the watercolour is mixing, it really isn't like that watercolour paper that the manufacturers promise it'll be like. But for what we're doing, it will be absolutely fine. We want to go pretty dark with this background, pretty vibrant, because we're going to be lifting colour out and we want it to really show up. And if we're lifting colour out of a very pale background, you're not going to get a lot of contrast. So be gutsy. I think I'm going to do this as a matching set colour wise. I was thinking, oh, should I do all sort of different colours? And actually, no, I'm not. Don't worry about the edges at this point. You could paint them, or we can always touch them up. We're trying to make this background as interesting as possible. We could put some little splatters in. They could be quite fun. Or you can use this as an opportunity to explore different texturing techniques. The classic ones that probably we all have heard about is putting salt into a wash, or putting plastic wrap over things to make all lovely wrinkles. So let's do some of that now. I'm going to sprinkle it just lightly over a couple of them. I've got a thin plastic bag here. Let's move those out of the way so I don't make a mess of them. What I can do is just scrunch that up all over, pull it around and make an interesting background pattern, then leave it in place to dry, and when I take it off, hopefully that'll be gorgeous. I'm going to do 2 with the salt and 2 with my scrunchy up pattern. Don't just plonk the plastic on, definitely move it around to get the pattern you want before you leave it to dry. Well, this is exciting. Look at these beautiful, beautiful patterns that are developing. That's all dry enough and coming off. Oh, yummy. Well, aren't those fun? So I need to make sure these are absolutely, absolutely dry. So I'm going to give them a quick hair dry, then just rub off the excess salt. Now it's a case of finding a suitable stencil, and given the colours I chose, the fern is absolutely lovely, but I might do a different one on each. And I've got all these sort of natural, I don't think flowers, I think we're talking leaves here. Oh, that might be quite a nice one. No, not flowers, flowers. That's a bit flowery. Leafy. No, I don't like that one. Oh, that might be quite nice. I thought these were a total bargain. Say, I think, what was it? 12, 15 of them for about £5–6. It's worth just looking and working out the direction, because I don't want to lift the prettiest patterns. I think that's a pretty pattern, so I might do that. And you could have some going all the way through if you want. Entirely up to you. I've got this old toothbrush. I promise it is an old one, not my current one. And I'm just dampening it, but I don't want it to be wet, because if it's wet, the water will seep under and smudge. So then I need to scrub through my stencil and dab away what I've lifted. You can do this technique very easily on paper as well, but on the watercolour ground the paint really lifts very, very easily, so we should get a more dramatic effect. And let's take a look. If, say, you thought, oh, I haven't lifted enough, very carefully go back in, line it up. It should be pretty obvious, and then you can lift a bit more. If you were doing this on paper, you need to be sure that you didn't pill up the surface of the paper. So I've just lifted a bit more. I am going to reverse it and put it at a bit of an angle like that. Again, just clean off my brush. Make sure it's not too wet. And then lift, 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 scrub, scrub, scrub. If you happen not to have an old toothbrush to hand, of course you could use a short, flat, stiff brush maybe a bristle brush if you've got one. But I reckon an old toothbrush works pretty well. I might just put the ghost of a one through there. And I'll just let that dry off again. Right, hold it firmly in place and give it a good scrub. And then we take it off and we get that rather lovely pattern. The other thing that you can use is magic eraser if you want to. So you would just dampen it and then really take off the excess again. You don't want any of that water getting under the stencil. So let's do this. And let's do the reveal. What I think I'd like to do is just a couple of random leaves. Say here. And that's the second of our little coasters done. I think the magic eraser takes off a little bit more, and that's quite nice because that will make this seem brighter and closer to us. Again, I'm just deciding which way round I want it to go. If when you're using magic eraser you see bits coming off like that, that is the magic eraser wearing out. It's not somehow magically destroying your coaster. And the final one I think I will do with this. Oh, that's quite pretty, that one. I do like to change the stencils around just so it doesn't look like it's a total repetition. Now we need to do something just to neaten off the edges. The backs I'm not terribly worried about. You could gesso those and paint them white, but the edges I do want to look neat. I'm just going to use an acrylic marker and found one in a toning colour that I can just paint the edges green. If you haven't got acrylic markers, you can of course do this with watercolour, or if you want the edges white, you could just go over them with the watercolour ground again. I mean, that would be easy, and then you could have nice clean edges. And then you just need to think about sealing them, because you saw how easily the watercolour lifted, and if we're using these as coasters with drinks, you could wash away all your work with one spill of a cup of tea. So I think that you could use a spray varnish. You would need to be very careful if you used a brush varnish, because there's a danger that you will brush away your work as well. But I would seal it with at least one coat of a spray varnish, and then put on a thicker coat of acrylic varnish. I think that's what I'll go for once everything is super dry. Now I'm going to put a far thicker coat on of satin varnish. This is just water-based, so it doesn't have any nasty smell. It can just be brushed on, whereas this stuff do spray outside just to protect your lungs. It does look milky when you put it on, but don't fret about that. It will dry clear. I've chosen to use a satin varnish because I quite like that sort of just mid sheen rather than a full gloss. You could use matte to keep that watercolour feel to it. You could use gloss if you like that. You might even want to put on a thin coat of resin. I personally don't like resin because it is so sort of smelly, and frankly I've seen so many bad resin jobs that, yeah, I think it's quite hard to get it to look really good. Now I'll let those dry, but I am going to put a second coat on. Don't forget to wash your brush. I've popped a second coat of varnish on these, and a quick tip is that to stop them sticking, because there's always going to be a slight sticky edge to them, just pop them on something so they can dry and they won't stick to the newspaper or anything like that. And now all I need to do is pop on their little feet. But these came with the blanks of the wood, so it's just stop it scratching any of your furniture or whatever. As soon as those are on, we have our little set of hand painted coasters. Even if you can't actually paint